The station drifted in a quiet orbit around a star that had long ago decided it was tired of shining. Its light was thin, pale, almost apologetic as it filtered through the reinforced glass of the observation corridor. Elias Foster stood there longer than necessary, holding a cup of something that insisted on calling itself tea, even though it tasted like it had been assembled from spare machine parts. He took a sip, immediately regretted it, and muttered, "One day I'm going to find who programmed this thing and apologize to them for whatever went wrong in their life." Behind him, the station hummed with its usual stubborn persistence. It was a place designed for endings, remote, quiet, and far from anyone who might ask inconvenient questions. People came here when they wanted to disappear gracefully, or at least quietly enough that no one would argue about it. Foster had stopped asking why a long time ago. The arrival alert chimed, soft but insistent. A new patient. He glanced at the display panel. One incoming transport, minimal escort, private authorization. That usually meant money or influence or both, or someone trying very hard to avoid either. Great, he sighed, setting the cup aside. Another mysterious stranger choosing the worst hotel in the galaxy. The docking sequence completed with a low mechanical sigh. Foster made his way through the corridor, boots echoing faintly, until he reached the airlock. The door opened with a controlled hiss, revealing a single figure stepping inside as if she had done it 100 times before. She didn't look like someone arriving to die. That was the first thing he noticed. She moved with an easy, deliberate grace, her posture straight, her expression calm, not resigned, not afraid. Her clothing shimmered faintly, a layered silver fabric that shifted like liquid light with each step. And then there were her ears, long and elegant, curving slightly backward, unmistakably marking her as something other than human. She paused when she saw him, studying him with a quiet curiosity that felt inappropriate for the situation. "So," she said, her voice smooth but carrying a faint amusement, "this is where people come for peaceful endings." Foster blinked once. "You say that like you expected better decor." She glanced around the sterile corridor, then back at him. "I did. At least a plant. Maybe a dramatic window with a view. Instead, I get this." He crossed his arms. "That is a window." She turned slightly, peering at the distant dim star. "That looks like the universe forgot to pay its electricity bill." Foster tried not to smile. He failed slightly. "We like to keep expectations realistic." She nodded as if accepting a minor inconvenience rather than a life-altering reality. "Fair enough." There was a brief silence, not uncomfortable, just unexpected. "I'm Medic Foster," he said finally. "You must be Kyra." "I must be," she replied lightly. "Otherwise, this would be a very awkward introduction." He gestured toward the inner corridor. "Let's get you settled." She followed without hesitation, her gaze drifting over the station with open curiosity. Most patients avoided looking at anything too closely. She seemed to be memorizing it. "Tell me," she said as they walked, "is the tea here always terrible, or do you reserve that experience for special guests?" Foster glanced at her. "You haven't even tried it." "I can sense these things," she said with mock seriousness. "It's a rare ability. Very impressive." "Truly remarkable," he said dryly. "We should run tests." "I'd pass," she replied, "but I'd complain the entire time." He huffed a quiet laugh before catching himself. That wasn't how this usually went. Conversations here were short, careful, often weighed down by everything left unsaid. Kyra, on the other hand, spoke like she had all the time in the world. They reached her assigned room. The door slid open, revealing a clean, minimal space. Medical monitors stood ready, their displays calm and indifferent. She stepped inside, looking around with a thoughtful tilt of her head. "It's not as bad as I expected." "That's the best review we've had all year," Foster said. She turned to him, her expression softening just slightly. "Good. I'd hate to start my final days by being disappointed." There it was, the truth, stated plainly, without hesitation or fear. Foster nodded once, professional instincts settling back into place. "We'll begin with a full scan. It'll help us monitor your condition and manage—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "I've read the reports." Of course she had. He gestured toward the diagnostic bed. She sat down without resistance, her movements still calm, still steady. As the scanner activated, its soft light passing over her, Foster studied the readings. Advanced degeneration, systemic failure, all exactly as expected. Everything made sense, except her. You don't seem... He hesitated, searching for the right word. Like I'm dying, she offered. Yes. She considered that, then smiled faintly. I suppose I don't feel like it. That's not how this usually works. She leaned back slightly, watching the ceiling as the scanner continued. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Foster shook his head. There's no wrong way to... Die? She finished, glancing at him again. That's comforting. He opened his mouth, then closed it. She had a way of turning his words into something else entirely. After a moment, she added, quieter now. I didn't come here to be sad, Medic Foster. I came here to be... free. The word lingered in the air, heavier than anything she had said before. Foster looked back at the data, at the steady decline mapped out in precise numbers. Then at her, sitting there with that same calm, almost defiant presence. For the first time in a long while, he felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Curiosity, and against his better judgment, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Kira adapted to the station with an ease that unsettled Foster more than any medical anomaly ever could. Most patients treated time like something fragile, something that had already begun to slip through their fingers. She treated it like an old friend she had decided to annoy on purpose. On the second day, she rearranged the entire room. Not dramatically, she did not move walls or override gravity, though Foster suspected she might try if given the chance. But she shifted small things. The chair angled toward the window. The medical console rotated just enough to feel less judgmental, as she put it. Even the lighting adjusted to a softer hue after she spent 10 minutes arguing with the system's interface. You know it doesn't actually have feelings, Foster said, watching her tap at the controls. It does now, she replied. I've threatened it. That explains the sudden cooperation. She glanced over her shoulder. Fear is a powerful motivator. You should try it on your T-machine. Foster snorted quietly, then caught himself again. He had spent years building a careful distance between himself and his patients. It made things easier, cleaner. Kira kept stepping over that line as if it didn't exist. He focused on the tablet in his hand instead, reviewing her latest scan. The readings were consistent, worsening in a way that was precise, predictable. There was no mystery in the data. And yet, you're staring at that like it owes you money, Kira said. I'm making sure everything is accurate. It's accurate, she said simply. He looked up. You sound very certain. I've lived with this long enough to recognize the pattern, she replied. It doesn't change its mind. Foster frowned slightly. Medicine does sometimes. She smiled faintly. Then maybe you should argue with it like I did with the lights. Right, I'll intimidate a terminal condition into leaving. It's worth a try, she said. Be firm, confident, maybe wave something threatening. He held up the tablet. This is as threatening as I get. Kira considered that. Yes, I can see why the disease feels comfortable staying. He exhaled through his nose, a quiet laugh slipping out despite himself. It was absurd. All of it. The setting, the situation, the way she spoke about things most people avoided entirely. But there was something else beneath it. She wasn't ignoring the truth. She was choosing how to face it. Later, as the artificial cycle dimmed the station's lights to simulate evening, Foster found her in the observation corridor. She stood near the glass, arms loosely folded, watching the faint glow of the dying star. You picked the best view, he said. She tilted her head slightly. Best is a generous word. It grows on you. I hope not, she replied. I'd be concerned if this became my standard for beauty. He stepped beside her, both of them looking out at the quiet, fading light. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said, Do you ever get tired of this place? Constantly. Then why stay? He shrugged. Someone has to. She turned her gaze toward him, studying him with that same quiet curiosity from before. That's not a real answer. It's the one I use, he said. Convenient. Efficient. She smiled faintly. then looked back at the star. I was supposed to get married, you know. Foster glanced at her. Arranged? She nodded. Very important, very strategic, very not what I wanted. And refusing it got you here. Refusing it got me disowned, she corrected lightly. This, she gestured vaguely around them, was my own decision. There was no bitterness in her tone, no anger, just a simple statement of fact. You don't seem regretful, he said. I'm not, she replied. I'd rather choose a short life that's mine than a long one that isn't. Foster leaned slightly against the wall, considering that. That's a risky philosophy. She glanced at him again, one eyebrow lifting. Says the man who works in a place dedicated to endings. Fair point. She let out a soft breath, her gaze returning to the distant star. I just didn't expect it to be this short. The words settled between them, heavier than anything she had said before. Foster didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure there was a response that wouldn't sound hollow. After a moment, she straightened slightly, the shift in her posture subtle but deliberate, like someone adjusting their balance. Well, she said, her tone lighter again, at least I avoided a terrible wedding. He blinked. You assume it would have been terrible. It would have involved at least 3 speeches I didn't care about, and 1 relative pretending to like me, she said. Statistically, that's already too much. That does sound exhausting. Exactly, this is much simpler. Foster hesitated, then asked, What would you have wanted? She looked at him, really looked this time, as if weighing whether to answer. Then she said, something honest. The simplicity of it caught him off guard. No grand description, no elaborate dream, just that. He nodded slowly. That's reasonable. I try to keep my expectations manageable, she said with a faint smile. It helps avoid disappointment. You came to the right place for that. She laughed softly, the sound echoing faintly in the quiet corridor. Yes, I'm starting to see that. They stood there a while longer, watching the fading light together. Foster found himself wondering, not for the first time, how someone facing the end of their life could feel so present, and why, despite everything he knew, it felt like this story was only just beginning. By the 4th day, Kira had decided the station was too quiet, not in a dramatic, poetic way, just in the practical sense that nothing ever happened unless someone forced it to. This place needs an event, she announced, sitting cross-legged on the diagnostic bed as if it were a lounge chair, rather than a piece of medical equipment. Foster didn't look up from his tablet. We have events. They're called scheduled checkups. Very exciting. No, she said firmly. That's not an event. That's paperwork pretending to be alive. He scrolled through her latest scan results, frowning slightly. You're not exactly in a position to host a festival. She tilted her head. You're right. A festival would be too ambitious. Let's aim lower. I'm afraid to ask. You should be, she said, smiling faintly. I want a wedding. Foster froze for a fraction of a second before slowly looking up. A wedding? Yes. He waited. Nothing followed. You're going to need to add more details to that sentence, he said carefully. I don't think I do, she replied. It's a fairly straightforward concept. You are aware, he said, setting the tablet aside, that weddings typically involve 2 people. I've heard rumors. And the second person is... She met his gaze without hesitation. You. There was a pause. A very long, very quiet pause. Somewhere in the station, a system beeped politely, as if trying to break the tension, and then thinking better of it. Foster blinked once. I'm sorry, I think I misheard you. You didn't, she said. I definitely did. You didn't. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. You want to marry me? Yes. Me. Yes, you specifically. I don't have time to interview candidates. That's reassuring. She watched him with mild curiosity, as if his reaction were an interesting but predictable variable. You're overthinking it. I am absolutely not overthinking it, he said. I am thinking about it the correct amount. Kira shifted slightly, her expression softening just enough to take the edge off her words. It doesn't have to mean what you think it means. That's usually a terrible sign, he muttered. She let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. I don't want a life together, Foster. I don't have one to give. I just... She hesitated, searching for the right words, which seemed to frustrate her more than anything else. I want one thing to be mine. He studied her, the humor in the moment fading just enough to reveal what lay beneath it. My family chose everything, she continued quietly. Who I would marry, where I would live, what I would become. I refuse that. This is the last decision I get to make. And you chose me, he said. You're here, she replied simply. You're kind. You argue with machines. It seemed like a good combination. That's your criteria, he asked, incredulous. I also considered your ability to tolerate my jokes, she added. You're doing reasonably well. Foster let out a slow breath, leaning back slightly. You understand this is not a small request. I know, she said. That's why I'm asking. He looked away for a moment, his gaze drifting to the wall as if it might offer guidance. It did not. You could ask someone else, he said finally. She shook her head. No, it wouldn't mean anything. And this would? Yes. The certainty in her voice was quiet, but unshakable. Foster felt something tighten in his chest, something he hadn't expected to feel in a place like this. He had seen countless endings, had learned to keep them at a distance, to treat them with care, but not attachment. This was different. This wasn't about loss. It was about choice. You realize, and he said slowly, that this would be legally binding. I assumed as much. You'd be marrying a man who makes terrible tea and lives on a station no one wants to visit. She smiled faintly. I've already accepted those risks. And I would be marrying someone I've known for less than a week. Efficient, she said. That's not efficiency. That's questionable decision-making. She tilted her head. Are you saying no? The question hung there, simple and direct. Foster looked at her, really looked this time, at the calm determination in her expression, at the way she held herself as if this moment mattered more than anything else. He thought about what she had said, about a life dictated by others, about a final choice that was hers alone. He could refuse. It would be reasonable, logical, safe. It would also stay with him for a long time. You're asking me to marry you, he said. Yes. So you can die having made your own decision. Yes. He exhaled slowly, then let his shoulders drop, the tension easing just enough for something else to take its place. All right, Kira blinked once. All right. Yes. You're agreeing. I'm agreeing. There was a brief silence, as if the station itself needed a moment to process what had just happened. Then she smiled. Not her usual amused smile, not the one she used to soften her words or deflect the weight of things. This one was quieter, real. Thank you, she said. Foster nodded once, already regretting the decision in a very specific, very complicated way. I have no idea how to organize a wedding. That's fine, she replied. Neither do I. Good, he said. We'll be equally unprepared. She swung her legs off the bed, standing with a renewed sense of purpose that felt almost alarming. This is going to be interesting. That's one word for it. She glanced at him, her eyes bright with something he hadn't seen before. Excitement. For once, she said softly, I'm looking forward to something. Foster didn't respond immediately. He just watched her, the reality of what he had agreed to settling in around him like the quiet hum of the station. Somewhere deep in the back of his mind, a thought surfaced. This was either the kindest thing he had ever done, or the most complicated mistake of his life, possibly both. The station had never hosted a wedding before, and it showed. Foster stood in the central corridor, staring at a hovering maintenance drone that was currently projecting a flickering holographic arch. It shimmered uncertainly between something elegant and something that looked like a malfunctioning doorway. Is it supposed to do that? He asked. Kira, standing a few steps away, tilted her head as she examined it. It has personality. It has instability. Same thing, she said. The drone emitted a soft beep, as if mildly offended, and adjusted the projection. The arch steadied, its light settling into a soft, silvery curve that matched the faint shimmer of Kira's clothing. Foster crossed his arms. I didn't authorize decorative functions. You did when you asked it for wedding support, Kira replied. I meant logistical support. It interpreted your emotional needs. I don't have emotional needs. The drone beeped again, louder this time, and produced a gentle cascade of floating lights that drifted through the corridor like slow-moving stars. Kira smiled faintly. It disagrees. Foster looked at the lights, then at the drone, then back at Kira. I'm being outvoted by a cleaning unit. Democracy is important, she said. He exhaled, but there was no real irritation in it. If anything, the absurdity of the situation made it easier to stand there, without thinking too much about what this moment actually meant. Kira stepped forward, her movements calm, deliberate. Her appearance had changed slightly, still simple, still understated, but there was an intentionality to it now. The silver fabric she wore caught the light differently, as if it had been adjusted to reflect the occasion. You look, Foster paused, searching for a word that didn't feel inadequate. Like I'm about to make a questionable life decision, she offered. That was already established. She smiled. Then I suppose I look appropriate. He nodded once. You do. There was a brief silence, not uncomfortable, just filled with the quiet awareness of what they were about to do. The drone floated between them, projecting a small interface panel. Witness protocol active, it announced in a calm, neutral tone that somehow carried the weight of ceremony despite clearly being designed to report air filter status. Kira glanced at it. It's very official. Foster nodded. I'm impressed it hasn't tried to clean something mid-ceremony. Give it time. The drone beeped, almost defensively. Foster straightened slightly, his usual relaxed posture replaced by something more structured, more deliberate. He wasn't sure when that had happened. Kira stepped closer, standing directly in front of him. For a moment, neither spoke. Up close, he could see the subtle differences in her features, the slight angle of her eyes, the delicate curve of her long ears, the way her expression held both calm and something quieter beneath it. You can still change your mind, he said. So can you, she replied. He shook his head faintly. I already made my decision. She studied him for a second, then nodded. So did I. The drone emitted a soft tone. Ceremony may begin. Foster glanced at it. Straight to the point. Efficient, Kira said. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then spoke, his voice steady even if his thoughts were not entirely organized. I don't have a speech prepared. Good, she said. Neither do I. That makes this easier. It makes it honest. He let out a quiet breath, then met her gaze fully. Kira, he said, the name feeling heavier now than it had before. I don't know you very well. That's true, she replied. And this is not a normal situation. That's also true. But you asked me to do something that matters to you, he continued, and I chose to say yes. She watched him closely, her expression steady, attentive. I can't promise anything beyond this moment, he said, but I can promise that I'm here, that I'll respect the choice you made, and that I won't treat this like it doesn't matter. Kira's smile was small, but it carried something deeper than her usual lightness. That's more than enough, she said softly. She took a breath, then spoke, her voice quieter but no less certain. Elias Foster, she said as if testing the sound of it. I don't know you well either. That seems to be a theme. It is, she agreed, but I know enough. He raised an eyebrow slightly. That sounds suspicious. You're kind, she said, even when you pretend not to be. You stay when it would be easier to leave, and you said yes when you didn't have to. He didn't respond, but his expression shifted slightly, the words landing somewhere deeper than he expected. I don't have time to build something complicated, she continued, so I'm choosing something simple. I'm choosing this. She paused, then added with a faint hint of her usual humor. Also, you make acceptable conversation, which is a significant advantage. I'm honored, he said dryly. The drone emitted another soft tone. Vows acknowledged, proceeding to binding. A brief pulse of light moved through the holographic arch, then settled around them, a subtle shimmer that felt more symbolic than technological. Legal bond established, the drone announced. There was no dramatic sound, no sudden shift in the environment. Just a quiet confirmation. Kira exhaled slowly, as if releasing something she had been holding on to for a long time. "Well," she said, glancing at him, "that was surprisingly simple." Foster nodded. "I was expecting more complications." "Give it time," she replied. He huffed a quiet laugh, then looked at her again, the reality of what had just happened settling in. "You're my wife now," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "That sounds strange when you say it like that." "It feels strange." "Good," she said. "That means it's real." The floating lights drifted around them, the drone hovering nearby as if waiting for further instructions and quietly deciding there were none. For a moment, the station didn't feel like a place built for endings. It felt like something else entirely. Kira glanced toward the observation window, where the pale star continued its slow fading burn. "I think," she said softly, "this is the best decision I've ever made." Foster followed her gaze, then looked back at her. He didn't say anything, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about what would happen next. He was just standing there in a moment that felt unexpectedly complete, and somehow that made it harder to ignore what was coming. The station returned to its quiet routines as if nothing unusual had happened, which Foster found mildly offensive considering he had just gotten married in a corridor with a judgmental cleaning drone as witness. Kira, however, seemed entirely unbothered. "So," she said the next morning, sitting comfortably in the observation corridor with a cup of tea she had already decided she disliked. "Is there a handbook for this?" "For what?" Foster asked, adjusting a panel that had no real need for adjustment. "Being married." He paused. "Not one that applies to this situation." "That's disappointing. I was hoping for clear instructions." "If there were clear instructions, I suspect fewer people would look confused all the time." She nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense." He glanced at her. "You don't seem confused." "I'm choosing not to be," she said. "It's more efficient." Foster almost smiled, then caught himself. Almost. The moment passed quickly, though. Kira's condition had begun to shift. It was subtle at first, her movements slightly slower, her pauses a little longer. The data confirmed what he already knew. Progression, steady and inevitable. He monitored everything carefully, adjusting treatments, recalibrating support systems, doing what he always did. But it felt different now, because now she wasn't just a patient. That thought lingered longer than he wanted it to. Later, as the artificial lighting dimmed again, Kira lay back on the diagnostic bed, staring up at the ceiling as if it held something interesting. "I think I'm getting worse," she said casually. Foster checked the readings. "You are. I appreciate your honesty. It would be strange if I lied." "True," she said, "although it might be more comforting. I'm not very good at comforting lies. I've noticed." He adjusted one of the monitors, his movements precise, controlled. She watched him for a moment, then said, "You're trying very hard not to look worried." "I'm not worried," he replied automatically. "Of course not," she said. "You just look like someone who is deeply invested in the emotional well-being of a panel." He exhaled quietly. "It's a very important panel." "I can tell. You keep adjusting it." "It needs adjusting. It hasn't changed in the last 10 minutes. That's because I'm doing a good job." She smiled faintly, then shifted slightly, wincing just enough that he noticed. His attention snapped back immediately. "What is it?" "Nothing dramatic," she said. "Just everything reminding me it exists." He moved closer, scanning the data more carefully now. The readings showed increased instability, but nothing unexpected. That didn't make it easier. "You should rest," he said. "I've been resting," she replied. "It's becoming my primary hobby." He hesitated, then said, "Try to sleep." She looked at him, her expression soft but steady. "Will you stay?" The question was simple, but it carried weight. Foster nodded once. "Yes." "Good," she said, closing her eyes. "You're better company than the ceiling." "I should be offended." "You're not." "No," he admitted. "I'm not." The station grew quieter as she drifted into stillness, her breathing slow, measured. Foster remained where he was, watching the monitors, watching her, his usual distance eroding in ways he didn't quite understand. Time passed. Hours maybe. At some point, her breathing changed. It wasn't abrupt. It didn't trigger alarms immediately. It was a subtle shift, a pattern that didn't quite align with what he expected. Foster frowned, leaning closer, checking the readings again. Something was off, not in a way that suggested immediate failure, but in a way that didn't fit the progression he had been tracking. "Kira," he said quietly. No response. He checked her pulse, her vitals. Everything was steady, too steady. That didn't make sense. The monitors flickered slightly, recalibrating, as if uncertain how to interpret what they were seeing. Foster's frown deepened. "That's not right." The data suggested a shutdown, but not a collapse, a transition. He had seen death before. He knew how it looked, how it unfolded. This wasn't it. "Kira," he said again, more firmly. She didn't move. He ran a deeper scan, overriding standard protocols, forcing the system to analyze beyond its usual parameters. The results came back slowly, piece by piece. And then, he stopped. But no. He stared at the screen, reading it again, then again, as if repetition might change the outcome. It didn't. The pattern wasn't degeneration. It was something else. Something structured, deliberate. A biological process he didn't fully recognize. But one thing was clear. This wasn't the end. It only looked like it. Foster let out a slow breath, his mind racing as he cross-referenced the data, pulling up everything he had on her species, digging through fragmented medical records and incomplete research. Buried deep in the archives, he found it. A process. Rare. Poorly documented. A state that mimicked death to an almost perfect degree. Healing. He leaned back slightly, running a hand through his hair. "You're not dying," he murmured. The words felt unreal. Behind him, the station remained quiet, unaware of the shift that had just occurred. Kira lay still, her expression peaceful, unchanged. But everything had changed. Foster looked at her, then back at the data, then at her again. A quiet, almost disbelieving laugh escaped him. "Of course," he said under his breath. "Of course this happens after I marry you." The absurdity settled in, not reducing the weight of the moment, but reshaping it into something he could almost manage. He stepped closer, his voice softer now. "Well," he said, looking down at her still form, "this is unexpected." No response. He nodded to himself. "That's fine. Take your time." He glanced at the monitors, then back at her, the tension in his chest easing just slightly, replaced by something unfamiliar. Relief, and something else. A strange, uncertain anticipation. Foster pulled a chair closer and sat down beside her. "I suppose," he said quietly, "this means I'm not a widower." The station hummed softly around them, steady and unchanged. But for the first time since her arrival, the silence didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something waiting. Time, which had once moved with predictable precision on the station, became something softer, less obedient. Foster stopped measuring it in hours. He measured it in signs. The faint fluctuations in Kira's neural activity, the subtle shifts in her cellular regeneration, the slow, deliberate way her body rewrote what had nearly been its ending. "She's not dead," he told the station's central system for the third time that day. "Status remains, non-responsive," the system replied calmly. "That's not the same thing." "Clarify." "She's healing." "Data inconclusive." Foster exhaled sharply. "Your data is outdated. Updating requires confirmation." "She'll wake up," he said. There was a pause, as if the system were considering arguing further and then deciding it was not worth the effort. "Monitoring continues," it said instead. "Good," Foster muttered. "Try to sound less skeptical next time." Behind him, the maintenance drone drifted lazily through the room, pausing near Kira's bed. It emitted a soft scanning pulse, then beeped once. Foster glanced at it. "You agree with me, right?" The drone beeped again. "I'm choosing to interpret that as support." The days blurred together, but the waiting never felt empty. He spoke to her sometimes, not because he expected an answer, but because silence felt inappropriate now. "You missed an argument with the T-machine," he said one cycle, adjusting a monitor. "It almost won." No response. He nodded slightly. "I'll try harder next time." Another day he sat beside her, reviewing data that now made more sense than it had before. "You're very inconvenient, you know that?" he said. "I had a perfectly organized understanding of your condition. Very neat, very final." The monitors hummed quietly. "And then you decided to redefine death," he added. Still nothing. He leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms. "That's rude." The drone beeped softly as if agreeing. Foster glanced at it. At least someone here appreciates consistency. But beneath the quiet humor, something had shifted. He wasn't waiting for the inevitable anymore. He was waiting for her. It changed everything. Weeks passed. The data stabilized, then improved. Slowly, steadily, like something rebuilding itself from the inside out. Foster noticed the first real sign before the system did. A slight increase in neural activity, distinct from the passive patterns of the healing state. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at the display. "There you are," he murmured. The system chimed a moment later. "Cognitive activity increasing?" "Yes," Foster said. "I can see that. Condition reassessment recommended. Already ahead of you." He stood, moving closer to the bed, his focus sharpening. "Kira," he said, his voice calm but carrying a quiet intensity. "If you can hear me, now would be a good time to prove me right." The drone hovered nearby, as if equally invested. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint movement. Her fingers twitched. Foster froze, watching carefully, not trusting it yet. Another movement, subtle but unmistakable. He let out a slow breath. "That's new." The monitors responded instantly, adjusting, recalibrating, acknowledging the change. "Motor function returning," the system reported. "Yes," he said quietly. "I noticed." Kira's breathing shifted, deepening slightly, her body responding to something beyond the automated processes that had sustained her. Foster stepped closer, his usual composure holding, but just barely. "Kira," he said again. Her eyes opened, not dramatically, not all at once, slowly, confused. She blinked once, then again, her gaze unfocused at first before settling on the ceiling. There was a long pause. Then very quietly she said, "I feel like I've been asleep for a year." Foster let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "Close enough." Her brow furrowed slightly as she turned her head, her gaze landing on him. For a moment, she just looked at him. Then she frowned. "Why do you look like that?" "Like what?" "Relieved and concerned at the same time," she said. "It's a strange combination." "I have my reasons." She shifted slightly, testing her movement, her expression tightening just a fraction. "Did something happen?" Foster hesitated. There were many ways to answer that question. None of them were simple. "Yes," he said finally. She studied him, her sharp awareness already returning faster than he expected. That's not a reassuring answer. It's an accurate one. She pushed herself up slightly, wincing, then glanced around the room as if trying to piece together what she had missed. "I remember," she started, then stopped, her expression shifting. "The ceremony." Foster nodded once. "Yes." She looked back at him, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "And then I died." "Not exactly." There was a pause. Kira blinked, processing that. "I didn't die." "No." She looked down at herself, then back at him. "You're sure?" "Very." Another pause. Then slowly she said, "That seems like an important detail." "It is." She leaned back slightly, absorbing the information, her expression somewhere between confusion and something that might have been amusement. "So," she said carefully, "if I didn't die—" Foster crossed his arms, bracing himself. "Then we're still married." He nodded. There was a long silence. The drone beeped softly, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. Kira stared at him. Then unexpectedly she laughed. It started small, then grew, filling the room with a sound that felt impossibly alive after so much stillness. "This is," she said between breaths, "either the most ridiculous situation I've ever been in." Foster raised an eyebrow. "Or?" She looked at him, her eyes bright despite everything. "Or the most interesting." He exhaled slowly, the tension he hadn't realized he was holding finally easing. "I was hoping you'd say that." She tilted her head, studying him again, more carefully this time. You stayed, she said. It wasn't a question. Foster nodded. Yes. She held his gaze for a moment, something quieter settling beneath her usual humor. Then she smiled, softer now. Well, she said, that complicates things. He huffed a quiet laugh. You think? She leaned back slightly, looking at the ceiling again, as if reassessing everything. I was supposed to have hours, she said, maybe days. And now? She turned her head, meeting his gaze once more. Now, she said, it seems I have time. The words lingered, heavier than anything else. Foster didn't respond immediately, because for the first time since she arrived, he realized something. Time wasn't the problem anymore. What they did with it was. The station no longer felt like a place built for endings, and that was deeply inconvenient for its design philosophy. Foster noticed it first in small ways. The observation corridor, once a quiet refuge for people waiting for the inevitable, had become a place where conversations lingered. The pale dying star outside still burned with the same quiet resignation, but it no longer felt like a symbol of finality. It was just a star. A tired one, perhaps, but still there. Kira stood by the window again, exactly where she had been on her first day, except nothing about her felt the same now. You know, she said, arms folded loosely, this star is still unimpressive. Foster leaned against the wall beside her. It's consistent. I was hoping for improvement. I'll file a complaint with the universe. Please do, she said. Be firm. It responds well to pressure. He almost smiled. That had become a habit he was still adjusting to. Kira turned slightly, her long ears catching the faint light as she studied him with that familiar, thoughtful gaze. You're different. That's concerning. It's noticeable, she corrected. You argue less with the walls. I never argued with the walls. You absolutely did. That was a one-time event. It was not. Foster exhaled quietly, then glanced at her. You're different too. She raised an eyebrow. I survived dying. I feel like that gives me some flexibility. That's fair. There was a brief pause, comfortable now in a way it hadn't been before. The question had been there since she woke up. Neither of them had rushed to ask it. Kira tilted her head slightly. So, what happens now? Foster didn't answer immediately. That was new too. He used to have answers. Or at least, he used to pretend to. Now he considered things. We have options, he said finally. I like options, she replied. They're better than destinies. He nodded. We can file for annulment. Given the circumstances, it would be approved without much difficulty. She watched him carefully. That sounds very reasonable. It is. And very safe. It is also that. She turned back toward the window, her expression thoughtful. And the other option? Foster crossed his arms slightly, not defensive, just steady. We don't. She glanced at him again. That's less detailed. It's less defined, he corrected. We stay married. We figure out what that means. Kira considered that, her gaze drifting back to the fading star. For someone who works in a place designed for clear endings, she said, you're becoming very comfortable with uncertainty. Foster looked at her, really looked this time. That's your fault, he said. She smiled faintly. I'll accept responsibility. Silence settled again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. After a moment, Kira pushed herself away from the window, turning to face him fully. I came here to die, she said. That was the plan. Very simple, very final. Foster nodded once. And instead, she continued, I made the most important decision of my life in a hallway with a drone that judged me. It was a very official drone. It beeped at me. It beeps at everyone. She let out a soft laugh, then shook her head slightly. And now I'm here, alive, married, slightly confused. That's a reasonable reaction. She stepped closer, not rushed, not hesitant, just deliberate. I don't want to undo that decision, she said. Foster didn't move, but something in his expression shifted, subtle but undeniable. You're sure? He asked. She nodded. I chose this when I thought it would only last a few days. That made it honest. She paused, her voice softer now. If I choose it again, Knowing I might have years, that makes it real. The words settled between them, steady and certain. Foster exhaled slowly, something easing in his chest that he hadn't realized had been tight for a very long time. I'm not very good at this, he admitted. The staying part. I'm not very good at it either, she said. We'll be equally unprepared. That seems to be a pattern. It's working so far. He let out a quiet breath that turned into something close to a laugh. That's a low standard. It's a realistic one. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Foster said, if we do this, it won't be because of what happened before. Kira tilted her head slightly. No, he said. It'll be because we're choosing it now. She smiled, and this time there was no trace of deflection in it. Good, she said. I prefer that version. The drone drifted into the corridor, pausing as if sensing something important was happening. It emitted a soft, approving beep. Foster glanced at it. You don't get a vote. The drone beeped again, louder. Kira laughed. It disagrees. Of course it does. She looked back at him, her expression steady, open in a way it hadn't been when she first arrived. I think, she said, this is where my life actually starts. Foster considered that, not as a medic, not as someone waiting for an ending, but as someone who had just stepped into something entirely unexpected. Then I suppose, he said, I should stop treating this place like the end of the story. Kira raised an eyebrow. You think? He looked at the station around them, the quiet corridors, the steady hum, the distant star that refused to completely fade. For the first time, he didn't see it as a place people came to disappear. He saw it as a place where something had begun. Yeah, he said. Kira stepped beside him, their shoulders nearly touching as they both looked out at the same dim, persistent light. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no sudden shift in the universe, no grand signal that everything had changed. Just two people, standing in a place that had been built for endings, choosing something else instead. And somehow that was enough. The star outside flickered faintly, holding on just a little longer. Not because it had to, but because it could.